This webinar will take you through how to identify and survey for our widespread frog and toad species and how to record them with a focus on taking part in the National Amphibian Survey.
The first part of this is identifying frogs and toads, otherwise known as neurons in the UK. And of course, we have four native species: the common frog, familiar to most people, the common toad, then there's the Natterjack and the pool frog. There are several introduced species, which I'll also talk about later in the talk. The ones you're most likely to encounter, of course, are the common frog and the common toad. Now, the common frog will be familiar to most people. They've got smooth skins and are relatively athletic as compared to toads. For example, leaping about if you catch one in a net. However, there are certain diagnostic features that we like to talk about because some frogs look like toads and some toads look like frogs, believe it or not. The common frog has this dark patch, eye mask, if you like. They're like a bandit. And of course, they have also obviously webbed feet. You can find on a common frog a dorsolateral ridge, but most obvious really about a frog, apart from the coloration, because they are very variable, is that they got very athletic back legs as compared to the toad. Just a note about variability. These are all common frogs. They're all the same species, but you'll also see that they have the black or dark eye mask in common. Now, I would say the most common coloration of the common frog is the one in the bottom right there. That's, you can get those just about everywhere, but the ones in the top left, for example, are also quite common, especially in my experience, northern latitudes. So if you see something that looks like a frog and it's got a dark eye mask, it's probably a frog, whatever color it is. There are plenty of frogs that have unusual coloration, like the one in the bottom left, so red or pink or even yellow, and it's thought that it might be related to exposure to chemicals, for example. So onto toads then. The toad is a differently shaped animal, as you'll appreciate. This is a very large female. And of course, toads, in contrast to frogs, have very rough, warty skins and tend to hop or walk rather than leap about. They do have dark markings in a similar place to frogs, but they tend to be associated with the glands behind their eyes rather than through the eye, like so, not an eye mask. And the eardrum isn't visible on a toad. The eye is very distinctive. It's orange or bronze in colour. And just to emphasize that, here's a male toad. They're less robust than the females and have a shallower head. And I always, when I'm doing training courses, say, and most people don't remember this these days, of course, but if you remember olive oil and Popeye, the male toad is Popeye and the female is olive oil with weedy front arms. Most importantly, of course, even if you get a very slimy, smooth toad, you look at its eye colour, and if it's bronze or orange, it's definitely a toad. And if you just quickly whiz back to the common frog, its eye colour is basically frog coloured. So, yeah, not distinctive at all. Whereas our toads have got very distinctive orange eyes. In terms of telling males and females apart, I'm using this example because this is particularly macho male toad here. They've got very, very chunky front arms, as I said, and also these what we call nuptial pads on their fingers and thumbs. Very obvious in a toad in the breeding season, and actually even before the breeding season. But you can also see these features on common frogs as well. Um, Tend to be more discrete lumps, but yeah, chunky forearms and lumpy fingers are features of male anurans. So on to spawn then. You'll probably all know this, but frog spawn is always in clumps and toad spawn is always in strings wound around, sorry, vegetation. It's normally a little bit after frogs, but in recent years, to be honest, because the seasons are getting a little bit confused these days, you quite often get frogs and toads breeding at the same time, and they get quite confused about that. But you'll always be able to tell toad spawn from frog spawn. When they hatch, of course, they're both small and tadpoley, and they look very similar. But as they grow, they differentiate quite nicely. So on the left there in this uh, slide, we've got a common frog tadpole, and on the right, we've got a common toad tadpole at very, very similar stages of development, actually. So if you look at their hind bits, they've both got the vestiges of their rear legs just starting to develop. However, the frog on the left is mottled and greyish, and that's because basically they're tasty. Everything likes to eat a frog tadpole, pretty much everything anyway. Newts, dragonfly larvae, water beetles. So they are camouflaged and they hide in the mud and the vegetation at the bottom of the pond for the most part. Toads, on the other hand, uh, have the distastefulness of the adults, and they're quite happy to swim around and are more obvious. And just to emphasize that, um, if you see a shoal of tadpoles by the side of a pond, they're more likely to be toads than frogs, especially if they're all obviously black. So they often aggregate, and actually, it's thought that they often aggregate in family groups as well. So that's quite interesting. Yeah, they don't hide so much as frogs. Of course, when you stop being a tadpole, you want to be going on your journey towards being an adult frog or toad, which means you need to metamorphose. And baby frogs and toads or metamorphs look very much like the adults. So the common frog on the left has already got a slightly pointed snout, and you can see that it's got muscular back legs. Whereas on the right, the common toad has got a snub snout and is, well, not got muscular back legs, is what I would say. Common toad metamorphs are always really rather small, probably about 10 millimeters, not from snout to vent. Um, and that's because, well, to be honest, when toads metamorphose, their skins haven't fully developed, their lungs haven't fully developed. If they get too wet, they'll drown. If they get too dry, they'll suffocate. So it's a very um, vulnerable time for metamorphs, actually, and toads in particular. So, but you'll never mistake a common toad metamorph from a common frog, I don't think. Just for completeness, we'll do the other anurans that you can find in the UK. Of course, the other one is the Natterjack. It's the same shape as a common toad, but paler in colour, I would say, with a very restricted distribution. They tend to run. Also, in many cultures, they call them the running toad. They often, almost, well, 99.9% of the time, have a yellow dorsal stripe. Not orange eyes, yellow or green. Greenish or reddish warts, and much shorter back legs, which is really why they run rather than hop. They are, of course, strictly protected, and you need a license to handle them. They are our only toad, or any a neuron actually that has a single central vocal sac. And you can tell me afterwards whether you've heard this toad calling. Hopefully I enabled it, but if not, I apologise. This is a male, of course, and only the males call, so it has muscular front legs. And on occasion, it can be difficult to tell apart the spawn of a common toad from a natterjack. The rule is basically that once they've been laid and they fully absorb the water in the pond that they're in, a natterjack toad spawn string is a single line of eggs, whereas a common toad spawn string is a double or more. So you can see that in this picture, but it's hard to tell, to be honest, when they're very, very first laid. So just be aware of that if you're in an area where you do have natterjacks. Tadpoles are very hard to tell apart. You have to look at their chins, actually. They're smaller, they sunbathe more, and apparently they have a little white spot on their chin. I've rarely seen that, but I'm told it's true. Baby natterjack, which are the cutest things you'll ever see in the world, by the way, are a little bit like common toad metamorphs, but they already have this rather endearing yellow stripe on the back. And our last native species is the pool frog. Well, they're a different shape than common frogs, is the best thing I can say to you. You'll only find them in a couple of places in Norfolk, although you will find alien pool frogs in other places. They've been reintroduced from Sweden. They also have a yellow or green dorsal stripe. They also have a dorsolateral ridge, so there's two confusing features there with natterjacks and common frogs. But when you add these things up, they are different. They have a very, very obvious eardrum and a very obviously more pointed snout. They're also strictly protected. And just to emphasize differences that you won't see in other species, this is a male pool frog. You can see the dorsal stripe there. Males often have yellow or green around the jaw, around the head, and around the eyes. And again, I hope you're hearing the call there. But a very, very good feature to look for pool frogs, which have double vocal sac, is the white colour of the vocal sac. And you'll see why that's important in a few slides' time. So just some more pictures of pool frogs there. There's a breeding pair. You can see the male on the top left has got a greenish, yellowish head compared to the female. The metamorph is just for illustration, but also the spawn of a pool frog is very different than the spawn of a common frog, which is an obvious clump with dark embryos in it. And the embryos in a very looser, smaller clump of a pool frog tend to be lighter in colour, as you can see in that photo. So to finish up with ID then, our non-native species, which are increasingly prevalent, I have to say, especially in southeast of England, we get a lot of what we call green frogs, and they're more appropriately called water frogs because they're not always green, and they include non-native pool frogs, but also the midwife toad, the clawed frog, and the American bullfrog. There are many other species that do turn up, but these are the ones that have broadly been established in the UK. What these things look like, the most common or most likely non-native species are these green or water frogs that are closely related to pool frog. And there's just two examples there of what they look like. They're immensely variable. They're most likely in the southeast, but they turn up just about anywhere periodically. They're very well established in Kent and Sussex, for example, as well as places in Staffordshire and elsewhere. and they're not going anywhere for the time being, so they're going to turn up for surveys at some point. Yes, they like to bask, excuse me, on pond banks, and they call, and they're much more. I'm going to say they're much more obvious and much more nervy than common frogs. Um, they will jump into the water, and you will, if there's a colony of green or water frogs in a pond that you're surveying, you'll hear them jumping in almost certainly. Yes, again, like the bullfrog, they have paired vocal sacs. And just to emphasize that, this is a marsh frog that one of our volunteers kindly sent in. And you can see that it's got very dark grey vocal sacs, one either side of the head, whereas the bullfrog picture that I showed you earlier, the native bullfrog, has white vocal sacs. So that's one of the easiest ways of telling them apart, even though the coloration of the body varies a lot. Just to end on other anurans, then, um, the midwife toad, top left, is well, it's a very small and nondescript toad. It looks like a toad. It's not really a toad, actually, but it looks like a toad. And if you have a colony of those nearby, which you find, yeah, you'll see hopefully in the spring males carrying strings of eggs wrapped around their hind legs, hence the name midwife toad. If any of you are bird watchers, the call of a midwife toad is exactly, and I mean exactly, the same as a Scops owl. So if you're a visitor to the Mediterranean, you'd like to do bird watching, you've heard a Scops owl, you basically heard what a midwife toad sounds like. And if you want homework, you can look that up online when we finished. The other two most common or previously most common species that we would find would be the African clawed frog and American bullfrog. Hopefully, they're both gone now. The clawed toad or frog has probably been wiped out by a series of cold winters that we had a few years ago. The American bullfrog, which I can tell you is an ecological nightmare because it eats everything from baby ducks downwards, has been subject to an eradication program. So we hope both these things have gone, but it's clearly important to record them if you see them. So let us know, take a photograph and or record on alien encounters, and we'll get back to you with an ID and hopefully some way of dealing with it, he said optimistically. Okay, so that's really everything you wanted to know about and you're an ID, but we're afraid to ask. And I would end by saying um, you can revisit or renew your identification online with our series of bite-sized herpetology courses. There's the web address for that. There's lots on there, actually. They're all PDFs, and you can download them for free and review them at your leisure. And with that, I think I will stop sharing. Thanks for listening.
This is going to take you through um, surveying for how you go and see these species and how you can collect data that can contribute to our surveys. Amphibian and reptile conservation. Our vision for amphibians and reptiles is we are a conservation organisation, and the vision we're working to is a world in which amphibian and reptile species and the habitats that they need are thriving. But sadly, the situation is that many amphibians and reptile species around the world have suffered big losses of population and declines in their distribution, and they're struggling. And so we have to work very actively to support them. Now, we are proud to be an evidence-based conservation organisation. What that means is that we want to base our conservation on data. We need data to understand the baseline state of species. We need data to track the impact of the interventions we may take. We will put in place evidence-based conservation. And then, of course, we need data again to track the impact of that and actually be able to sort of demonstrate that the species are recovering. So that's the plan. And that's and so I suppose the next thing to do is just explain that actually that puts real importance on data and an opportunity for everybody to actually try to contribute to the picture that helps active conservation work. Sadly, although we are really, really reliant on data, the fact is that many amphibians and reptiles, they're generally under-recorded. So even for common and widespread species, if we were to sort of put up a map, we'd probably have many gaps in it, which could mean the absence of the species, but will often actually just point to the fact that we've got a dearth of recording in that area. So I would encourage everybody to think about submitting your observations to a recording scheme, because your observations could be feeding into the work that conservation organisations like ARC do, and that could be mapping species distributions or being used to help advise a land manager. It will help towards assessing the status of the species, might get them recognised in planning, and we want to aspire to actually publishing population trends and understanding what species are doing. So your records are really important. And what we have, what ARC has established is the National Amphibian and Reptile Monitoring Programme. And what that is it's a portfolio of surveys and projects that we run that generate data. And if you go onto the website, you will be able to find a whole suite of national projects and also regional projects. And they are organised so that there are lots of opportunities to take part, something for everyone really, at all different skills levels. And hopefully you will find there something that you would like to take part in. And they generate different types of data and opportunities to actually go and see amphibians and reptiles. So this is the site where you will be able to find lots of information about these different projects and how to take part. Now, just explaining a little bit more about what we mean about data is that if I explain in terms of how that's organised a bit more, there are different types of data. At its simplest, we mean an observation of a species. We call those casual records. And so that's the type of record that you could submit to a record sender or to platforms. Here I'll be showing you the ARC one in a moment. Or you might go out and specifically go looking for a species. So we have an easy to participate survey called Garden Dragon Watch, where you go out and look for species in your garden. We call this an unstructured type of survey, but it's basically, again, a simple record. Or we have our more what we call structured surveys, and these are surveys with a set protocol to standardize how you do the survey. Might involve repeat visits, might involve being sent out to a particular type of habitat. And the way we are collecting data as part of the National Reptile Program, Amphibian and Reptile Monitoring Program, is that the combination of the surveys that we're running around the country collect different type of data, and in combination allow us to do the different types of analysis that I showed you. And without going into too much detail, the reason why we have different types of surveys is because different ways of collecting data give you different opportunities for analysis. So, for example, our casual surveys, collecting casual data allows us to plot dots on maps, but when we use our structured, more standardized surveys, we've got far more opportunity to track trends and have greater certainty about whether the species is present. So, little bit about species recording. So if you are new to biological recording, what do you actually record when you if you go out and you see an animal? What are we interested in? Well, the basic elements of a biological record are who, what, where, and when. And because those are key parts that allow that record to be logged, and they are details that help validate, verify those observations. On top of those details, there's extra information that we would be delighted to receive. So that might be if you record how many you've seen, or if you're confident in identifying something like the life stage you saw it in, or the sex. All of those extra details are really valuable, but the essential information is very much what it is, where you saw it, and when. If you have collected records, so when I would like where would be a grid reference, or we can even take things like what 3 words. Good place to put your submit records that you've just happened on by chance is the record pool. And this is an online recording tool that we collaboration between ARC and ARC UK. If you log into that website, you can submit records there. Or you might also choose other platforms that we can receive data from, as iRecord, which is another place where you can submit all sorts of biological data. Here is Garden Dragon Watch. This is something that we set up in 2020 when nobody could do very much biological recording, but it gave an opportunity to record species in your garden. You can do that very simply, upload your record, tell us what you saw, and you can put pictures up at this site as well. But the one I want to talk about most today is the National Amphibian Survey. This is a survey in which we are aiming to create a network of sites. The sites are water bodies, like a pond or a ditch. And we want these to be long-term monitoring sites, which involve people revisiting the sites to do multiple surveys over the course of a year. And hopefully you can find a place where you are happy to survey and revisit it in other years. And the reason why we want to do that is because this particular survey aims to determine trends in species populations and how abundance and distribution of toads and newts change at both at national scales and other scales where we have sufficient data to allow determination of patterns at region or below. And as well as aiming to sort of actually provide information of that type, we can use the information to help site managers. The survey has been set up with a range of ways that allow you to collect and interact with your data. So it's supported by online data entry and mobile data apps. You can find the whole protocol at this address, and you can register to take part. We'll be putting those details up again before the end of the presentation. And what we're aiming to do is establish a network of sites around the country, and we're aiming for a network that will be representative of the country. And how you go about getting one of these sites and setting one on sites up, you've got some different options about how to do that. So if you're completely new to this survey, you could suggest somewhere that you know. It's got to be somewhere where you can get permission from the landowner, or you could take on a site in our network that has previously been surveyed, and we're also soon to release a network of randomly generated 1 kilometre squares, where in order to actually try to make sure that we've got a random and an unbiased sample of sites around the UK, those are of particular importance to us for people to take on. One of the challenges is there isn't a national map of ponds and water bodies, so we're reliant on people supplying information on where those water bodies are. And so even if you don't go on to actually completing a survey, that information alone is quite helpful in itself. So you might also there might be some people on this call who are already surveying amphibians. Perhaps you've set up a local site. We've made our methodologies very generic. And so it's quite possible that your methodologies will be very similar to ours, in which case we'd like to hear from you. You might want to actually affiliate your monitoring with our survey, and we can draw that in. Or you might be a land manager, somebody who's got a location, who'd be interested in hosting a survey. If in any of those, the thing to do is get in touch with our survey coordinator, and we can work between us to sort of set you up with something. And what we're looking for is to set up, find a location and where you can go repeatedly back to this water body, most likely a pond, and survey it in a standardized way. We'll ask you to map it on the map and decide how you are going to establish a survey route. You might go all the way around the pond or round a section. It's something that you can easily repeat in the time that allowed for the survey. And what you will be asked to do is visit it several times in the course of the season and do some species surveying techniques. And we will also ask you to collect some habitat data. And these habitat data are very useful to us to be able to explain the condition of water bodies and how that influences what's found. And the photograph I've got here is images from some of the forms that you will have access to as a surveyor. So what is the actual National Amphibian Survey? What do you have to do? Well, there's two parts of it. There's a frog and toad survey element and a newt survey element. Today, we're only focusing on the frog and toad survey part, but I'm putting both bits up because some people may want to actually do both elements. We'll be doing a later session to talk about newts. So what you have to do is if you're doing the frog and toad survey, we're looking for 4 visits to a pond between January and the end of March. These dates are set by where you are in the country. There's a bit of flexibility there because they're really sort of guided by the weather conditions when they become suitable for the species to start appearing. And they're relying on homing in on the time when amphibians go back to the water body to breed. The amphibians, the frogs and toads, don't stay at those sites all year round. They're using them particularly to breed, and the survey methods pick up on that. What we ask you to do is do some daytime visual searches for frogs and toads, and also you could do a nighttime torchlight survey as one of your visits. We're looking for people to search for clumps of frog spawn or spawn strings, and indeed the adult or juvenile frogs and toads themselves. And the level of experience you need for this survey, you just need to be confident in identifying the UK frogs and toads and record your observations. If you are doing the newt survey as well, then we would ask you to, in combination, to do 6 visits across the whole surveys. The newt survey also does 4 visits, but it's slightly later in the year, and it's a little bit more involved using more equipment. So if you are new to surveying amphibians, I'd suggest you focus on trying out the frog and toad survey element. So let's look at those methods in a little bit more detail. So the first thing is our daytime visual survey. Sounds technical, but it's really just standardizing, having a look. So what you would do is, if you remember that slide with your water body and your route, you would walk around the bank steadily, and you would sort of think of your route as a series of 2-meter sections. You walk slowly round the pond, looking to see whether you can see frog spawn or toad strings. And in each 2 meters, you make a note of what you see. You're always staying on the bank. You're looking for spawn or tadpoles and spawn strings. And what you're recording is, for spawn, we're looking for you to count the clumps of frog spawn. You might do that by if there's lots and lots, you might estimate the area of that, and we can deduce that. For tadpoles, we ask you to sort of estimate the number you can see in categories, and also count the adults. Now, I'm just mentioning here, these species are multi-species surveys. If you do see anything else, we ask you to record that as well. I've got a note here that although we're not talking about newts tonight, if you did see a newt egg, we'd ask you not to count them. We want to know that you saw signs of newts, but we don't want you to actually count the eggs themselves. So torchlight. So on this, you would only do this after you've visited a site in the daytime and understood what the hazards are and made sure you know the site well. But we will help you to actually determine the presence of the animals and allows you to count them. For frogs and toads, the best time to do that is between January and March. And the evenings are when it's warm and still and calm, and the temperatures are above 5 degrees centigrade. And I think that actually is round the wrong way on that slide. It should say above 5 degrees centigrade. And how you do that is, again, working around your pond, thinking of it in 2-meter sections. You have to move the pond in an arc from the bank and back, covering that 2-meter segment, scanning to see what you can see. You repeat for all of the accessible areas of the pond, record how much of the perimeter you survey, and that's roughly what it would look like. So you do your 2-meter section, and then you move to your new 2-meter section, work your way around the pond. You need a fairly bright torch for this. and you're looking for good battery life. I'm going to mention it just briefly. I'm going to mention netting purely because some people, if you're doing that newt survey as well, may end up doing netting, but this is something that will really be covered in other training sessions. If it's just to emphasize that if you were using a pond net to support a survey, this was only really used in this situation where the in ponds where other visual methods aren't available. It's more appropriate, more applicable to newts, but it was again used in a very systematic way. So once you've gone around and recorded things, you would be entering it into our digital survey forms. These are also available on paper for people who hate that. But basically, for any method, you total up the sightings that you saw per each method, and you add them into the form. And we've got YouTube resources to show you how to do that. So the last thing I'm going to say is that all of these methods are available in our protocols on the website, and also very importantly, the protocols explain how you maintain, how you do this with respect for biosecurity, because it's very important to minimize the risk of transferring diseases or invasive plant species from pond to pond. So if you are using equipment, it's very important that you keep it clean and disinfected, and that includes your boots. So how do you take part? What if you're infused by what you've heard tonight and you'd like to sort of try out more recording for us and take part as an ARC surveyor? Please register as an ARC volunteer and tick the National Amphibian Survey option on the website. The survey coordinator will send you a welcome email, and you can go from there to actually confirm that you'd like to do a survey, and they will work with you to choose an option and get you set up with the site and the resources that you need. More information on the monitoring programme web pages or the National Amphibian Survey page. There's links here to the protocol. What I would say is if you have already registered as an ARC volunteer, you don't need to re-register. You just need to find your original welcome email and click on the confirmation link. Please don't register over and over again, because that slows down the process a little bit. But we will be delighted to hear you. And if in doubt, please email the survey coordinator.